Oh, we're back. We're so back, baby. Spielberg, Styria, the Austrian Grand Prix, the Red Bull Ring, one of the greatest tracks on the Formula One calendar by at least a margin. I'm gonna say top 3 at a minimum. It's only 4.3 kilometers, 10 corners, which does make it one of the shortest tracks on the calendar. Yellow. The margins are slim here, and I can't help but wonder, is Red Bull about to be embarrassed at their own home race? Will Kimi return from Barcelona ready to take the top step again? After all the bad luck and contention, is George ready to finally fight for a championship? Will Hamilton's good form continue? Has Charles Leclerc figured out his brakes? Because while he'll surely be needing them in Austria, I think we can all remember back to 2025 when Kimi Antonelli ran Max Verstappen off the road at the hairpin at turn 3, and I think it was on the first lap. Anyways, the sentiment being that lockups happen in Austria, there's a lot of heavy braking, and I hope Charles is ready for it. Red Bull, and more specifically Max, have historically dominated at this circuit. Max achieved pole position twice in 2021 and held the streak until Lando Norris got pole in 2025. That's a total of 5 pole positions, 8 podiums, and 5 wins for Max Verstappen in Austria. But new regulations bring new challenges for Red Bull, and the picture doesn't feel quite as clear this year. But to be quite honest with you, the story here isn't about Red Bull. We come to Austria 2 weeks after Lewis Hamilton finally got his first Ferrari win. That, along with the DNF, cut Kimi Antonelli's championship lead by 25 points, and it feels like everybody's arriving to Austria with something to prove. But which team, and furthermore, which driver will bring it home on Sunday? Let's chat about it. Okay, let's start with the basics. Red Bull Ring is 4.3 kilometers. In fact, it's the shortest lap time of the Formula One season. Oddly enough, that's what makes it one of the most demanding circuits of the season as well. Heavy braking, heavy on the gas for multiple short straights, and a blend of low, medium, and high-speed corners and elevation changes don't provide much of a mental or physical break. 71 laps in just over an hour of racing. You can't talk about the Red Bull Ring without mentioning Max Verstappen, because for the last decade, Max Verstappen has owned the circuit. In fact, Max Verstappen owns all the records on the circuit with 5 wins, 5 poles, and 8 podiums. Now, for drivers still currently on the grid, Lewis Hamilton does come in second with 2 wins, 3 poles, and 6 podiums. Now, I'm sure his longevity in the sport does do him some justice here, but still, nonetheless, not a bad circuit for Lewis Hamilton. The fastest qualifying lap was set here by Lando Norris in 2025 with a 1:03.971, and the fastest race lap goes to Oscar Piastri in 2025 with a 1:07.924. This is a circuit where you see a little more variability in win rate from pole position. Looking at the history, if you're in P1, you have a 38% chance of winning, from P2, 23%, from P3, 15%, from P4, 7%, P5, 5%. So while qualifying on pole position is still obviously optimal for Austria, we shouldn't be surprised if the P2 or P3 qualifier is somewhere in the mix and maybe even fighting for the win. While Valtteri got pole in 2018 and Charles got pole in 2019, Max managed to bring home the win both years. In 2020, Lewis Hamilton qualified on pole, then from 2021 to 2024, Max qualified P1 across 5 Grand Prix, but only converted 3 of them into race wins, with Charles Leclerc winning 2022 and George Russell winning 2024. Lando Norris then ended Max's dominant streak in 2025, taking pole position and the win. Max Verstappen has won here 5 times, and that's exactly why this weekend feels so convoluted and loaded and just hard to predict. Why do I say it feels convoluted? Let's just take a look at his results so far this season. In Australia, he set no time because he crashed in Q1. Now, granted, that crash was no fault of his own. However, he did end up finishing that race in P6. In China, he qualified P8 and retired after 45 laps. In Japan, P11, finished the race in P8. And then something incredible happens in Miami, and all of a sudden he's qualifying P2 and finishing the race in P5. He did have a 5-second penalty for crossing the pit exit line. And then in Canada, he qualifies P6 and finishes the race in P3. Okay, cool, he has his first podium, but then the momentum continues in Monaco when he qualifies P2 out of nowhere. Unfortunately, that didn't go very far because he DNF'd before the first lap even started. But then in Barcelona, he's back down to P5 and finishes P4. I think what I'm trying to get at here is it's really hard to put your finger on how good the Red Bull is this year. One weekend, Max will qualify P11, and the next weekend, it's P2. I understand these are new regulations, and you can't really make comparisons across different years, but the story isn't totally dissimilar from the past. The Red Bull can be good on any given weekend, but it's unpredictable when it's going to be good. It's almost like Max turns up the notch and he's like, okay, it's working, let's stay here. But then there's other weekends where they spend all of their free practices chasing lap time that they just cannot extract out of the car. So is Red Bull going to be dominant in Austria? It's really hard to say say, and I think any guess is probably as good as mine, but here's the one thing I will say. If Red Bull give Max the car he needs, he can go out there and win. Let's catch up on the title fight because it looks completely different than it did about a month ago before Barcelona. Heading into Austria, Antonelli is at 156 points, Hamilton 115, a 41-point gap. Russell sits third at 106, 50 points back, and Mercedes lead the Constructors' Championship 262 to 190 over Ferrari. Now, you got to remember, before Barcelona, Antonelli's lead over Hamilton was 66 points, and Mercedes had won 6 of the first 7 races. I really do tend to think that at that point, the sentiment was that Kimi Antonelli was going to walk away with the championship, and then Barcelona happened and Hamilton took his first win for Ferrari. Listen, if there's one thing to say about Barcelona, it's that Ferrari did something different, and it's really nice to see Ferrari trying something different. Ferrari was the only top 4 team in Barcelona to do a 3-stop strategy, and you have to admit that was one hell of a successful call. And on top of that, Lewis Hamilton was on fire out there, and it was really fun to watch. I think it was one day in Formula 1 history where just about everybody was happy. I mean, even Kimi Antonelli and the other podium sitters were happy for Lewis Hamilton, although there is certainly one guy who is not. Anyways, the larger point being that Kimi Antonelli's DNF swung the championship by 25 points in an instant. And just like that, the lead dropped to 41 points, and 41 points is still a large deficit, but it's not insurmountable for a driver like Lewis Hamilton. I don't think we've all yet realized how special this season of Formula 1 feels. I mean, really, just stop and think about it for a second. Sure, there's a lot of regulation drama, but did you realize that both Kimi Antonelli and Lewis Hamilton are fighting for the championship? The youngest driver to ever lead a Formula 1 World Championship and a true legend of the sport fighting for his 8th with Ferrari. I honestly can't decide which one I'd rather see win because both scenarios are so exciting. I think all we can truly hope for is a good competitive fight. After the race in Barcelona, Kimi Antonelli said, "I feel very empty emotionally right now, but I'm looking forward to Austria because I think we can do really well." I'm not gonna lie, this one made me laugh really hard because Kimi Antonelli feeling emotionally empty after that many wins just makes sense. You're riding this high for 5 races in a row and then boom, a 0-point finish, and I'm sure that messes with your dopamine levels. With that being said, Kimi Antonelli does seem like he's bringing a good mindset to Austria, and as long as he continues the form he's had for most of the season, there's nothing that's not possible. A 41-point lead is still pretty comfortable. That being said, it's not insurmountable. Let's talk a little bit more about the upcoming weekend, what to expect and what we should keep our eyes out for. As we chatted about earlier, I think one of the larger questions is, can Hamilton keep the pressure on? Yes, Ferrari looked great in Barcelona, but will that continue in Austria? Now, reports do say that Ferrari is bringing an upgrade package to Austria, one of them being their first ADUO upgrade. As motorsport.com describes, Ferrari has been running a hot engine this year, with intake air entering the intercooler above 100 degrees Celsius versus the usual 60 to 70. From Austria onward, that ceiling rises over 115 degrees Celsius. That, paired with a new shell fuel built specifically for that configuration. Higher temperature and pressure in the chamber lets more fuel burn, which should mean more power. Now, how much power is this actually bringing to Ferrari? It's kind of hard to say, but estimates say about 5 to 15, which is a pretty large range. All that to say that Ferrari does seem to be taking this championship battle seriously. They've brought multiple upgrades to multiple weekends, and they all seem to be working out net positive. And speaking of net positive, Charles needs to get in the net positive with his brake situation because Austria is not the track to be experimenting. Another question top of mind for me going into this weekend is, where will McLaren sit in the ranks? A few races back, they looked like a genuine challenger to Mercedes. A Miami Sprint 1-2, Norris pushing Antonelli hard in the Grand Prix, and then Norris on the podium in Barcelona last week. The question is, will it continue? We've also seen a little bit of a dip in Oscar Piastri's performance this year, so I'll be curious to see how he qualifies next to Lando. And I think the question that everybody has in mind right now, including Toto Wolff, is what will the Mercedes reliability picture look like this weekend? Will Kimi Antonelli have another devastating DNF? Will Russell's bad fortune continue? Will the McLaren boys even be able to start the race? I mean, none of these questions are out of contention for this year. If you're a Mercedes fan, this makes you nervous, but if you're a Hamilton fan, it may be the biggest blessing of the season. If you truly think about it, it's a double-edged sword for George Russell because reliability issues can either work in his favor or against him. And while he and any other driver would publicly say that they don't like seeing a DNF in the team, I bet George Russell wouldn't mind another DNF from Kimi Antonelli. Okay, we've finally made it to that point in the video. Can I predict the results of the Austrian Grand Prix using only math? Welcome back to my series where I try to remove my bias entirely. For both qualifying and race results, drivers get a score from 0 to 1 based on math. And here's a quick look at the formula if you're interested. Now, I say it every time, this formula isn't perfect. It doesn't take context into account, but that's kind of part of the fun. So here's what the numbers are telling me for Austria, and we'll start with qualifying. Norris is on pole with a score of 0.838, and that puts Lewis Hamilton in P2 and Charles Leclerc in P3. Now, as you've probably noticed, the formula didn't put either Mercedes boys in the top 3, and there's a good reason for that, but we'll get into it. Okay, and now on to the race predictions. Hamilton wins his second race in a row with a score of .767. Lando comes in second place, and Russell and Piastri tie with a .6477. The same exact score down to 4 decimal points. You can't make this up. Now, if this isn't feeling quite right to you, you're probably right, and let me do some explanation on the formula. Antonelli is still leading the championship by over 40 points, but the model barely has him inside the top 6 for either session. Why is that? You know, that one time where he crashed into Max Verstappen at the hairpin at turn 3 and both of their races ended? Anyways, the larger point being that the formula gives both him and Max a 0 for circuit history. I also think it's worth mentioning that Norris's case is almost entirely built off of one session. He won from pole in Austria last year, and that's doing most of the heavy lifting for him in the map. So you tell me, are these predictions feeling good, or are they feeling a little bit off? I guess only time will tell. And with that, here's the final thing I'll leave you with. This weekend, Red Bull needs to prove that their season isn't lost in front of the one crowd that will notice the most. On the contrary, Ferrari needs to prove that Barcelona was a turning point and not just a one-off. And Mercedes, well, Mercedes just needs their car to simply finish.